I am so excited. Today we're going to look at the SBC's first metrics drop for the year 2025. They just released them, and it is a banger of a drop. Oh, and just for the record, I want to say I was spot on in my expectations. I just want to have a moment for that one. Hello everyone, and welcome back. Today is Tuesday, May 12th, 2026. This is Roll to Disbelieve, and I'm Captain Cassidy. Thank you for joining me. This is going to be so much fun. It is always fun to look at the SBC's metrics every year, and I've got a database about it. I'm slowly learning Excel so I can make that database sing, and it's paying off. I'm coaxing some interesting info out of it. And here's what's so funny. If I could figure this stuff out, you know damn well the SBC has some fancy-ass accountants who know the deets even better. God, their jobs have to be so dismal. They seem to spend a lot of time figuring out how to make bad news sound slightly less disastrous. But we're going to talk about that next time. Today, we are going to talk about the numbers themselves. And before we get going on those numbers, I would like to thank my patrons and supporters, because you make this fun possible. Thank you so much. If you'd like to become one of them, please check out the links at the end of today's write-up. You can find us on Patreon under Roll to Disbelieve, one word, and we have an official site, rolltodisbelieve.com. Thank you for whatever you decide to do. And now, our situation report. The 2025 SBC metrics just dropped. Now, when I talk about the 2023 report or whatever, I have a link in the write-up to all the SBC annual reports that they've ever printed. Each report contains metrics for the previous year. So today, the 2025 metrics that we're going to talk about, eventually they'll end up in the 2026 annual report. And I expect to see that report a month or two, maybe 3, after the annual meeting this summer. The Southern Baptist Convention, or SBC, is one of the very few American denominations that releases its performance metrics year over year. And I mean, yes, they're authoritarian, so they're going to spin doctor anything that looks off kilter, and sometimes they just decide to change how they report on really bad news. But there's something consistent year after year. That means we can track their performance on a number of bases. And from there, we can get a feel for the future of this unholy marriage of politics and religion that is modern evangelicalism. And this year, that unholy marriage does not look fantastic. Lifeway, which is the SBC's official publishing and research arm, just dropped the report. I have the relevant graph from their report in the write-up if you want to take a look at it. And at first glance, when we look at it, there's a lot of negative changes across the board, except for a few key places. Baptisms rose a bit from last year. Weekly attendance head counts and extra involvement figures, those saw a slight uptick. And there was a tiny lift in the number of additional campuses. They're not separate churches. They're more like a church decides to have a second meeting spot for people to attend the sermon, and they'll watch the sermon there and they'll participate in the worship and everything, but they're still officially part of that one church. Meanwhile, total members fell by almost 400,000 last year. Disastrous. And that's why the baptism ratio looks so nice this year. It's a measurement of baptisms per active members. And they want that second number in it, the 1 to whatever, to be as small as possible. Last year, it was 1 to 51. This year, it was 1 to 47. Also, in the bad news section, the SBC lost 268 churches. It wasn't their very worst loss. That would be the 2023 report, with 416 churches lost, but it's still bad, especially for a denomination that never had a net loss of churches until that year. These figures, taken all together, paint a very distinct picture of a polarizing denomination in decline. We're going to talk about those figures a bit today, and then I'll show you what those numbers really mean. First and foremost, that membership drop. no doubt the big story for most SBC watchers. They lost 390,000 people last year. Their membership in total now sits at 12.3 million. And like with the church closures, this ain't the worst drop they've ever had. That would be the 2023 report again, with a 457,000 drop. But it's still bad. And this decline has been going since, about 2007. And worst of all, this is an even bigger chunk of the existing membership number than that other year. That chunk is what I'm going to zero in on right now. I have that database. One thing I track on it is the percentage of membership decline. As I mentioned, this one began in the 2008 annual report. So it was 2007 performance. It reported a drop of 39,000 members, which worked out to about 0.24% of total membership. And from there to the 2015 report, that's kind of how it went. Tiny little percentage drops. Starting in 2015's report, they began jumping up into the 1 to 2% drops. And that continued until the 2020 report. This was the last pre-pandemic year. It's 2019's performance, and that was a 3% drop. Now, the drop hasn't always been consistent in size. Sometimes it eases back to under 2%, as it did with the 2024 report. But last year, solid 3% drop again. And if that continues, I fully expect to see the SBC's total membership falling to 11 million next year, or it's going to get really close to that point. And just to kind of put it in perspective, they haven't been at this low of a membership since the early 1970s. We're going to circle back to that era in a minute. Hang on to that. While membership rolls keep hemorrhaging, something really interesting is happening with the baptisms. In the 2020 report, so again, 2019 metrics, we see an ongoing baptism slump for the whole denomination. That year, the baptism ratio tanked at its peak of 1 to 61. Whew, that was bad. Denominational leaders had to be having kittens over something that bad. The SBC's baptism ratio is the ride or die metric for these guys. For their whole modern history, before I was even born, it's the one thing that they value above everything else. And the big name leaders in the denomination were fully aware that they were in decline decades before those membership drops began appearing in earnest. The baptism ratio, as I mentioned, is the number of baptisms compared to the total membership. A really low baptism ratio like 1 to 30, they fucking wish, means it takes the effort and resources of about 30 SBC members to cover one baptism. So a higher baptism ratio like 1 to 50, that means they're spending a lot more for each baptism. So it means they're less effective at evangelism. And all the SBC officially cares about is evangelism. So that's bad news. The pandemic made the SBC's 2020 numbers look disastrous. They hit a baptism ratio of 1 to 114, 114. They had 123,000 baptisms against 14 million members. But look, that was the pandemic. Nobody expected that number to stay that bad. And indeed, since then, they've been consistently building up their number of baptisms from that 123,000 number. And as they did, that ratio improved. It went to 1 to 88 the next year, 1 to 73 the next, etc. So now, for 2025's numbers, the SBC wrangled 263 baptisms out of 12.3 million members. That gives them a ratio of like 1 to 46.9, so just under 1 to 47, which means they are finally back out of the 1 to 50s. Though I doubt they'll stay that way for too long. And I gotta add this, the new ratio only looks that pretty because of the membership drop. They were at a peak of more than 16 million members in the late 2000s. That number of baptisms would have put them at 1 to 60. And for comparison's sake, in the 2000s, Their baptism ratio was in the 1 to 35, 1 to 43-ish range. In 2006's report, they tell us they scored 371,000 baptisms. So speaking just historically, this isn't great. This kind of drop in membership also speaks to huge numbers of churches closing. A lot of those members are vanishing because their whole church left the SBC rolls. For years now, I've been covering church closures in America. The SBC is not immune to the market forces that are forcing thousands of churches a year to close for good. But for a long time, they sure seemed to be. From time to time in annual reports, they would note a small net negative in the number of churches that they had as members. It wasn't much, but around the 2023 report, they started consistently showing declines in their overall number of churches. And from there, it's been solid negatives. Of course, negative numbers can represent churches that leave the denomination. Yes, of course. But they usually represent churches that have just closed. The last solid figures we have for SBC church numbers comes from a 2025 report about member churches between 2022 and 2023. Of course, I've got everything in the write-up if you want to check it out. In that report, we learned that about 1,100 congregations left the SBC in that time frame. Of them, more than three-quarters, 77%, which means about 900 congregations, just closed. 22% either left the denomination or got kicked out. That doesn't happen very often. We're talking single-digit numbers every year, but it does happen sometimes. So it's safe to say that the SBC loses a lot more churches to closure than it does from simple removal from the rolls. So this year, they report 46,608 churches. Last year, they had 46,876, which means a drop of 268, or 0.57%. That may not sound like much, but remember, net closures figure. Because the SBC, my friends, loves to shotgun church starts everywhere. In April, the SBC's official news site, Baptist Press, reported that the SBC had planted 792 churches, while another 127 churches joined the denomination. So that's a total of 919 churches starting up or joining. So this is where I had to double check my math because it looked ridiculous. Even after all those churches opening and joining and whatnot, the SBC's net number of churches was still that bad. They had to have almost 1,200 churches closing or leaving to get that kind of net drop. On the plus side, though, if that research still holds solid, that means only a couple hundred left because they were just sick of the SBC shit. Small victories, my dears, small victories. Those are what count, right? Another small victory came in the form of members' greater involvement in their churches. In the 2025 metrics, there are upticks in both attendance and extra involvement. Attendance, that one's simple. As you might guess, churches take head counts of everyone sitting in the pews. The head count goes into their annual church profile, or ACP, which the mothership uses to compile the metrics. However, if you look at the ACP's instructions, you'll see that they say they're okay with ballpark estimates and averages. Nobody is double-checking any of these numbers, or ever has. And even with all that leeway, the best churches could do is say that 36% of the SBC's members are parked in pews on a Sunday morning. And the same kind of goes for extra involvement. I use that term to mean participation in church activities that are neither Sunday morning services nor any kind of volunteering. Basically, it means Sunday school for the kids and small groups and Bible studies for the adults. Now, here's the funny part. This is the awesome part. This is why I love these guys so much. They are so dishonest, but you have to get the hang of how they communicate to understand that. They used to offer stats just for Sunday school attendance, and it was huge. But then, as it began to shrink, abruptly in the 2012 report, they just didn't report it. They just didn't tell us anything. And that continued until the 2016 report, when suddenly it began appearing again, but combined into all three of those activity types. And even by then, even the combined group was declining. Look, SBC leaders, they don't like to report bad news of any kind. Oh, they're very happy to change how they report or leave stuff out if it's awful. At any rate, in 2025, 2.6 million SBC members participated in those three extra activities. And that's a lot more than participated last year. It's 83,000 more. It's a solid 21% of members involved. Since the pandemic and that disaster, participation has been creeping up steadily for years. I mean, it's nowhere near the 50% plus they had before 2006, but it's better. So, we've had a lot of numbers today flying around. Here's what the metrics drop shows us about today's SBC compared to yesterday's. In the 1974 report, the SBC stood at 12.3 million members. They took in about $1.1 billion in total receipts. They had 34,000 churches, 7.1 million kids attending Sunday school, and they had a baptism ratio of 1 to 29. And that is just an incredible baptism ratio. I don't think they're ever going to see those days again. In contrast, in 2025, with the same number of members, 12.3 million, they took in $9.6 billion in undesignated receipts. They stopped reporting total receipts in 2023. Gee, we wonder why, don't we? They had 46,000 churches, so about 12,000 more churches. They only had 2.6 million attending extra activities, and their baptism ratio was 1 to 46. So they still have way more churches, and they're taking in ridiculous amounts of money compared to what they were taking in before. But the denomination is seeing less and less return for that investment. And as good as participation levels look now, it's still nowhere near what it was the last time they stood at this many members. So what I'm seeing in all these metrics is a denomination that is steadily shrinking with no way to recover. But the SBC-lings remaining in the denomination are finding their footing in the post-pandemic world. They're doubling down on their affiliation. They're attending a tiny bit more than they used to. They're participating in more extra activities. They're giving more money per individual than in recent years past. Unfortunately for them, the glory days are gone. But don't count on SBC leaders to care. They've got about 9.6 billion reasons not to care. That mothership that they're running, it is still a money-making machine. All they got to do is keep the flocks thinking that rejuvenation and recovery just around the corner, and that they're still on the winning team. And they have to keep it that way until it's time for them to retire. Thank you so much for listening. This was a blast. I hope you had fun too. Next up, we're going to talk about the cope, because the cope is amazing. I ran out of time today to do it, so we're going to do it next time, and I hope to see you there for it. For now, this is Captain Cassidy signing off. Have a great midweek, everybody, and we'll see you soon.